around 2 minutes.
Look at him, he's turning blue!
I've got it, just stay back.
Hold on.
No one watching that sidewalk understood how quickly a routine call could spiral into a career-ending catastrophe. 8 seconds. That's all it took for a rookie officer to make a decision that would fracture trust, ignite outrage, and expose a dangerous gap between authority and awareness. What you're about to witness isn't just a mistake, it's a chain reaction already in motion. Before we go further, hit subscribe, because stories like this don't just entertain, they change how you see the world. Officer Daniel Reyes had been on the force for exactly 93 days, long enough to memorize procedure, not long enough to recognize its limits. His training had drilled one idea into him relentlessly: hesitation gets officers hurt. So when the dispatch came through, disturbance, possible intoxicated male, non-responsive, Reyes didn't hear uncertainty, he heard threat. By the time he arrived, a small crowd had already formed, not panicked, not violent, just watching. That should have been the first signal. Marcus Hill lay on the pavement, his body jerking violently in rhythmic waves. His limbs struck the ground without coordination. His jaw clenched tight. Foam gathered faintly at the edges of his lips. His eyes weren't focused on anything at all. But Reyes didn't see a medical emergency. He saw unpredictability. "Sir, stop moving. Put your hands behind your back," Reyes commanded, stepping closer. A woman near the curb shouted, "He's having a seizure." Reyes barely processed it, because in his world, movement without compliance meant escalation. And here's what most people don't realize. During a grand mal seizure, the brain is misfiring at an uncontrollable level. The person cannot follow commands, cannot process instructions, cannot stop their body from moving no matter how loud the orders are. But knowledge under pressure is only useful if you trust it. Marcus's leg kicked outward suddenly, scraping hard against the concrete. Reyes instinctively stepped back. His pulse spiked. His training filled the gap left by uncertainty. Control the subject. End the threat. "Last warning," Reyes shouted, his voice sharper now. The crowd reacted immediately. "Don't do it," someone yelled. That should have been the second signal. Instead, Reyes reached for his taser. There are moments where perception locks in so tightly that reality can't break through. This was one of them. He fired. The crack of electricity cut through the air, fast and final. Marcus's body surged violently as the current hit, amplifying the neurological storm already inside him. His back arched, his head struck the pavement with a sickening force. And then, stillness. Not control, not compliance, something worse. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. The crowd seemed to inhale at the same time, as if the entire scene had been paused. Then everything collapsed at once. "Why would you do that? He's not moving. Call an ambulance." Reyes stood frozen, the taser still in his hand, because something didn't match what he expected. This wasn't how resistance ended. This looked like something else entirely. The movement hadn't stopped the way it should have. It had stopped completely. And in that silence, doubt finally broke through. What if he misread everything? What if this wasn't a threat at all? The sound of sirens began to rise in the distance, faint but approaching fast. Reyes reached for his radio, but his grip felt different now, less certain, less controlled. Around him, phones were already raised, recording, capturing every angle, every second, every mistake. Because this moment wasn't just happening in real time anymore. It was being preserved. And what those recordings would reveal, frame by frame, would challenge every assumption Reyes thought he understood about control, compliance, and judgment. But none of that had surfaced yet. Not the reports, not the footage analysis, not the expert testimony that would dismantle his decisions piece by piece, because the most damaging detail was still invisible. And when it finally came to light, it wouldn't just question what Reyes did wrong, it would prove he ignored the one thing that could have stopped everything. The paramedics arrived in 90 seconds, but by then the damage had already started rewriting the story. Marcus Hill still wasn't moving when they dropped to their knees beside him. One checked his pulse, the other tilted his head, clearing his airway with urgent precision. Oxygen mask, rapid assessment, no wasted motion. Seizure with possible head trauma, one muttered. Possible. That word would matter later. Reyes stepped back, the taser suddenly heavy in his hand, like it didn't belong to him anymore. The crowd wasn't yelling now, not as loudly. Something had shifted. They were watching him. Not the man on the ground, him. And for the first time since he arrived, Reyes felt it, the weight of being seen, not as authority, but as the cause. "Did you tase him?" a voice cut through. Reyes didn't answer, because the answer was already everywhere. Phones were still raised, recording, zooming in, capturing angles he hadn't even considered. Every command he gave, every second he acted, every moment he didn't pause. And here's what most officers aren't prepared for. Body cameras tell one story, bystander cameras tell another, and when they collide, the truth isn't always where you expect it to be. Marcus's chest jerked slightly as oxygen pushed into his lungs. A paramedic pressed fingers against his neck again, checking for consistency. "Pulse is weak," she said. Weak. Another word that would echo later. "Let's move, now." They loaded Marcus onto the stretcher with controlled urgency, securing his head carefully this time. As they lifted him, his arm dropped limp over the side. No resistance, no movement, just weight. Reyes watched it happen in fragments, like his brain was struggling to process a version of reality that didn't fit the script he'd been trained to follow. He keyed his radio. "Medical on scene," he said, voice tight. "Subject unresponsive." Subject. Even now he used the word, but something about it felt off, because the man being loaded into that ambulance didn't look like a subject anymore. He looked like a victim. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and just like that, Marcus Hill was gone. But the scene didn't reset. If anything, it intensified. A man stepped forward from the crowd, mid-40s, calm but not passive. "I'm a nurse," he said. "That was a seizure. You made it worse." Reyes swallowed, but said nothing, because arguing would mean certainty, and certainty was already slipping. The man didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "Do you know what a tonic-clonic seizure does to the brain? Do you know what electricity on top of that can cause?" Reyes's silence became its own answer, and the cameras caught that too. Within hours, those clips would be everywhere, slowed down, zoomed in, replayed with commentary, stripped of context, but loaded with impact. But right now, it was just a street, a shaken officer, and a growing realization. Because most people think consequences begin in courtrooms. They don't. They begin in moments like this, when doubt replaces confidence, when witnesses become narrators, and when a single decision starts multiplying into outcomes no one can contain. Reyes finally lowered his taser. Too late to matter. A second patrol unit pulled up, lights flashing. His partner stepped out, scanning the scene, then looking directly at him. What happened? It was a simple question, but there was no simple answer anymore. Reyes opened his mouth, paused, because whatever he said next wouldn't just explain the situation, it would define his role in it. And deep down, he was starting to understand something that hadn't been part of his training. This wasn't about controlling a scene anymore. This was about surviving what came after. Because Marcus Hill hadn't just been taken to the hospital, he had been taken into a system that would document everything, every injury, every second, every cause. And when those records surfaced,
They wouldn't just tell a story. They would contradict his.
By nightfall, the video had already spread beyond the city. By morning, it had a narrative. Rookie cop tasers seizing man. The headline didn't ask questions. It didn't wait for reports. It didn't need confirmation, because what people saw in those clips felt complete. And in the court of public opinion, feeling is often enough. Inside the hospital, Marcus Hill lay in a monitored bed, machines doing what his body struggled to maintain on its own. Oxygen levels stabilized, heart rate uneven but holding, a bandage around the back of his head where it struck the pavement. But the seizure, that wasn't the only problem anymore. Doctors were now tracking something else, something layered on top of it. And here's what most people don't realize. When a body undergoes a tonic-clonic seizure, the brain is already under extreme stress from misfiring neurons. Introducing an external electric shock during that process doesn't reset the system. It can intensify neurological disruption, prolong recovery, and increase the risk of secondary injury. That distinction would become critical, because Marcus hadn't just seized. He had seized and then been shocked. Two separate events, one compounded outcome. Across town, Reyes sat in a quiet office under fluorescent lights that made everything feel colder than it was. His uniform was still on. His report sat half-finished in front of him. He had written the words 3 times already. Subject appeared non-compliant. Each time it felt less accurate. His supervisor stood across from him, arms folded. "You tased him while he was on the ground?" he asked. Reyes nodded once. "You gave verbal commands?" "Yes." "And he didn't respond?" Reyes hesitated, because now that detail wasn't as solid as it had felt before. "No," he said finally, "he didn't respond." The supervisor exhaled slowly, not frustrated, measured. "Body cam's uploading now. We'll review everything." Everything, that word landed heavier than it should have, because Reyes already knew something the footage would confirm. The commands, the timing, the lack of pause, it was all there, and it wouldn't look the way it felt in his head. Outside that room, the department was already shifting, calls coming in, media inquiries stacking, internal affairs notified before the paperwork was even complete, because this wasn't staying local. It couldn't, not with video, not with a crowd, not with a moment that simple to understand and that complicated to explain. Meanwhile, the original footage continued spreading, but something new had entered the conversation. Analysis, frame-by-frame breakdowns, people pointing out details others missed. "He's not resisting, look at his hands. That's not aggression, that's muscle locking. Why didn't he wait?" Questions turned into conclusions, conclusions turned into outrage, and outrage started demanding accountability. Back at the station, Reyes finally stopped writing, because the story he was trying to tell didn't match the one already forming, not outside, not online, and maybe not even in reality. For the first time, he replayed the moment differently in his mind, not as a threat, but as a misread, not as control, but as escalation. And that shift, that single reframing, changed everything. Because if he was wrong about what he saw, then every action that followed wasn't just justified force, it was avoidable. The door opened again. His supervisor stepped back in, holding a tablet this time. "Footage is in," he said. Reyes didn't reach for it, didn't need to, because whatever was on that screen wasn't just evidence, it was a mirror, and mirrors don't care about intent, they reflect outcome. The supervisor tapped the screen once, then looked directly at him. "There's something else," he added. Reyes looked up, because the tone had changed, subtly, but enough. "This isn't just about the taser," the supervisor said, and just like that, the ground shifted again, because whatever came next was going to make everything worse. The tablet turned toward Reyes. "Watch closely," his supervisor said. The body cam footage began without sound at first. Just movement, just angles, just raw sequence. Marcus on the ground, the commands, the taser. Reyes had seen it all before, in his head, replayed in fragments. But this was different, because this wasn't memory. This was precision. The supervisor tapped the screen again, enabling audio. "Sir, stop moving. Put your hands behind your back." The voice sounded sharper than Reyes remembered, more urgent, less controlled. The footage slowed, frame by frame, and that's when it appeared. Marcus's hand, not reaching, not resisting, curled inward, rigid, fingers locked in a position no voluntary movement could mimic. "Pause it," Reyes said quietly. The supervisor did. Zoomed in. "Do you see it?" he asked. Reyes nodded slowly, because now, even without medical training, it was obvious. That wasn't defiance. That was neurological. But the video didn't stop there. The supervisor rewound. "Watch the head," he said. The clip played again, this time focusing on impact. The taser deployed, the convulsion intensified, and then Marcus's head slammed hard against the pavement, a sharp, unnatural bounce. Even without sound, it was violent. The supervisor froze it on impact. "That's where things change," he said. Reyes felt something tighten in his chest, because up until now, everything had been about the seizure, the misinterpretation, the decision. But this was consequence. And here's what most people never consider. In use of force analysis, it's not just the action that's evaluated, it's the outcome it directly causes. If a decision triggers a chain of harm that wouldn't have occurred otherwise, liability doesn't just follow intent, it follows impact. The supervisor tapped the tablet again, pulling up a second screen. Medical notes, preliminary, time-stamped. "Read this part," he said. Reyes leaned forward. "Patient sustained cranial impact consistent with secondary trauma during incident." Secondary trauma. Not the seizure, not the original condition, the moment after. Reyes sat back slowly, because that distinction wasn't subtle, it was devastating. Across the room, the silence stretched. Not tense, not chaotic, just final. "This is going to internal affairs," the supervisor said. "Effective immediately. You're on administrative leave." The words landed without resistance, because there was nothing left to argue. Not with the footage, not with the report, not with what was becoming undeniable. Reyes nodded once, mechanical, detached, as if his body understood before his mind could catch up. "Turn in your taser and badge before you leave," the supervisor added. There it was, the first real consequence. Not public, not viral, personal. Reyes stood, unholstering the taser slowly, placing it on the desk. Then his badge. The weight of both leaving him at once, but not the weight of what happened. That stayed. Because outside that room, the story was still growing, still evolving, still accelerating. News outlets had picked it up, legal analysts were already weighing in, and Marcus Hill, he wasn't just a patient anymore, he was evidence. Because the hospital had completed a full scan, and what they found didn't just support the footage, it confirmed it. The head injury wasn't minor, it wasn't incidental, it was significant, and directly linked to the moment of impact, which meant the narrative wasn't about a seizure mishandled anymore. It was about harm caused, preventable harm. And that shift, that single undeniable shift, was about to turn a mistake into something far more permanent, something that wouldn't end with suspension or termination, but with a number so large it would end everything Reyes thought he was building. The number didn't come immediately. First came the suspension, then the investigation, then the silence. For weeks, Officer Daniel Reyes existed in a space where nothing moved forward, but everything was closing in. His badge was gone. His uniform hung untouched. His name, once just another on a roster, was now circulating in reports, in news segments, in conversations he wasn't part of. And Marcus Hill? He survived. But survival wasn't the same as recovery. The seizure passed, the brain stabilized, but the head injury changed everything. Memory gaps, chronic headaches, sensitivity to light, the kind of symptoms that don't disappear, they settle in. Permanent. And that's when the legal process began. Because here's what most people don't understand. Lawsuits like this aren't just about what happened in the moment. They're about what could have been prevented, what should have been recognized, and what standard of care was ignored when it mattered most. Marcus's legal team didn't argue emotion. They argued sequence. Seizure, misinterpretation, taser deployment, impact, injury. Each step connected, each step avoidable, and most importantly, each step documented. The body cam, the bystander footage, the medical reports, they didn't contradict each other, they aligned. That was the turning point, because when evidence tells one consistent story, defense becomes limitation, not denial. The city knew it. Internal reviews confirmed it. Training protocols were brought into question, not just what Reyes did, but what he understood when he did it. Because this wasn't framed as malice, it was framed as failure. A failure to recognize, a failure to pause, a failure to adapt. And in the legal system, that distinction doesn't erase responsibility, it defines it. The settlement came quietly compared to the noise that led up to it. $5.2 million. Not a trial, not a drawn-out courtroom battle, a decision. Because dragging it further would only expose more footage, more analysis, more confirmation of what had already become clear. For Marcus, the money didn't undo anything. It didn't erase the moment his body hit the pavement, didn't restore the clarity he once had. But it did something else. It validated what happened, put weight behind it, made it official. For Reyes, the outcome was final. Termination followed the investigation. No return, no quiet reassignment. His record would always carry this moment, not as an isolated incident, but as a defining one. Because in the end, this wasn't about one decision. It was about the cost of certainty in the face of uncertainty, the danger of acting without understanding, and how quickly authority can collapse when it's applied without awareness. The footage still exists, still watched, still studied, not just as a mistake, but as a lesson. Because what happened on that sidewalk wasn't unpredictable, it wasn't random, it was preventable. And that's what makes it matter. If there's one thing to take from this, it's this. Knowledge isn't just power, it's responsibility, especially when someone else's life depends on it. If this story made you think differently, share it, because the more people understand moments like this, the fewer times they'll happen again.